So that was a clip from The Jazz Singer, which a lot of people say is the first talking picture, but it really wasn't. The year is 1872, and Edward Muybridge is an English photographer who's just vibing in America because he's made a really big name for himself there. And Californian Governor Leonard Stanford is like, dude, do you think that you could solve this really old riddle? And the riddle pretty much goes, do all four of a horse's legs leave the ground at the same time while it's running? And Edward doesn't have much else to do because it's the late 1800s, so he's like, hell yeah. So he starts working on the project, but then he kills his wife's lover, but then he gets off the charges, but then he still abandons the project. But then it's 1878, and it's April 18th, and Edward's really bored, so he actually gets the project done. And he does this by lining up 12 cameras along a racetrack, which are individually triggered when a horse runs past, creating this, a series of stop-motion photos. So a year later in 1879, Edward invents the zoopraxiscope, which is an early projector, and uses it to show his images. And this is significant because it's the first showing of moving images of photographic live motion. Jumping ahead a few years brings us to 1887, where Hannibal Goodwin invents the first transparent plastic flexible roll of film. And this was important, as rolls of film not made of plastic were not very durable and overall not very good, and the alternative to rolls of film was slates, which could not be moved at all and thus could not record any moving images. This new type of film can be used in a lot of different ways, so a lot of different projectors and cameras start appearing. Now it's 1888, and the Theatre Optique is patented by Emile Reynaud, and this is pretty much a better version of a zoopraxiscope because it's a revised version of a praxinoscope, which is a better version of a zoetrope, which is the same thing that the zoopraxiscope was based off of. This was presented in 1892 as the first presentation of projected moving images to an audience, and over its lifetime the Theatre Optique had over 12.8 thousand shows and 500,000 visitors. Additionally, this was the first use of perforations, which are the tiny holes in the side of film. So now we're at a point where films are being recorded on cameras and shown commercially, but they still don't have any proper synchronized sound. And to see where that comes from, we have to go all the way back to 1877. So Thomas Edison is getting on that grind, creating the phonograph, which is an improvement to the telegraph and the telephone. And it's a way to record sound on tinfoil covered cylinders. So pretty much there's a needle which traces into the cylinder the shape of sound, and then there's a separate needle which can read these traces and create this sound again. It's pretty much how modern records work. So fast forward back to February 1888, and Edward Muybridge is visiting Edison's lab. You remember him? He's the dude who invented the zoopraxiscope. So he's pitching to Edison, and he's like, surely we collab. I mean, if we combine your phonograph with my zoopraxiscope, dude, we'll go so viral. But then Edison shut that man down. He cancelled him because he did not like the zoopraxiscope. So Edison may have hated the zoopraxiscope, but he liked the idea that Muybridge was pitching. So in October 1888, he filed a claim for a device that would do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. It was pretty much an image viewer. And now in June 1889, Edison went to his employee William Dixon and was like, you're a photographer, surely you just invent this whole thing for me. And Dixon was like, okay. So William Dixon started doing all of the experiments and most of the work, and at this point he even created 35mm film just by literally cutting up other pieces of film. I don't know what he was doing. Anyway, at the end of the project, Edison took all of the credit, and it took historians years and years and years to actually give Dixon any credit. And all I'm saying is William Dixon deserves everything and Thomas Edison deserves nothing. Eventually on the 24th of August 1891, Edison filed 2 patents, one for the kinetograph, which was his version of a camera, and one for the kinetoscope. The kinetoscope was actually completed in 1892 as a device with a peephole that you would put your eye up to in order to view films being played on the inside of the device. It was pretty much the opposite of a projector. So at this time in America, films really started to gain popularity, and on April 14th, 1894, the first kinetoscope parlor was opened, and this was in New York. It was a building that literally just had kinetoscopes in, like the equivalent of a cinema, but in 1894, and you would pay 5 cents to watch a 15 to 20 second film of Eugene Sandow, who is a local strongman. Now it's the year 1895, and everything's about to go insane. So it all starts in 1895 with the presentation of the Lumiere cinematograph by Augustin Louis Lumiere, and this was a combination camera, printer, and projector that was hand cranked, so it didn't require electricity, making it very portable. This portability led to a lot more different films being developed, and eventually the moving camera. Now it's April 2nd of 1895, and William Dixon is just vibing, and he's helping Woodville Latham and his sons make the kaleidoscope, which is a more advanced projector, but then Thomas Edison finds out about this and fires him. The problem is that the kaleidoscope still exists, and is creating a lot of competition for the Edison company, and slowly making the kinetoscope extinct, as less people can view the kinetoscope at one time, and people are beginning to prefer projectors. So it's September that year, and the phantoscope is demonstrated by C. Francis Jenkins and Thomas Armat, and as Edison needs a competitor to all of these new upcoming projectors, the kinetoscope company buys the rights to it. Additionally, Thomas Edison himself agrees to manufacture and produce films for the device, on the condition that it's renamed the Votoscope, and he's given all the credit for the invention because he's an invalid human being. So it's April 23rd, 1896, and the Votoscope has its first theatrical exhibition, and it's doing pretty well, but then it's November 1896, and the Edison Edison company creates the new projecting kinetoscope, also called the projectoscope, so it abandons the vitascope completely. So let's skip ahead a couple years to 1898 with the cinemacrophonograph by Berthon, Dossett and Joubert, and this was a projector that had a mechanical connection to a phonograph and used earphones to play sound. Now this had to use earphones because a lot of devices at the time struggled with poor synchronization between film and sound and poor amplification of the sound, all of which combined for a poor potential for commercialization. So we reached the year 1900, and it's the 1900 Paris Exposition, and Leon Gaumont is at the 1900 Paris Exposition, and he's showing his projector which has a mechanical connection to a gramophone. Now a gramophone is pretty much a way better phonograph because it uses discs, which are pretty much like modern day records, instead of cylinders, and it also is connected to a really large amplification bell, making the sound quality much better. A year later in 1901, Leon Gaumont decided that mechanical was out and electrical was in, and created a device with an electrical connection between film and sound. And then, a year after that, in 1902, Charles Paulson created the auxtophone, which used compressed air for amplification. This all meant when 1906 rolled around, Leon Gaumont could create the Elgaphone, which stole the compressed air idea and combined it with the idea of an electronic connection to create a device that had the capability to fill a large hall with sound, much like a modern-day cinema. Commercially, things changed in 1905 with the first Nickelodeon being opened by John Harris and Harry Davis. A Nickelodeon was a primitive movie theatre with enough room for 96 people to stand but no seats, and it played 15 to 20-minute films projected onto a sheet. Nickelodeon started to appear everywhere, and by 1907 nearly 2 million Americans had visited a Nickelodeon. It's 1907 and Sigmund Lubin goes, "What if we sync films to records that already exist, so reluctant investors are more likely to buy in?" And everyone went crazy stupid, like synchronized film was the new electric vacuum. The most notable invention of this time was the 1907 chronophone by Leon Gaumont again, which was an innovation with a dial indicating whether or not the sound was properly synced to the film and allowing minor adjustments to be made. There was no viable competitor to this until the 1908 camera phone by E. Norton. It also gave rise to vaudevilles, which were pretty much old-school compilation videos of shorter clips. By the end of the summer of 1908, over 140 theatres had ordered a camera phone, but things went downhill from here. There was a lack of standardization within the industry, meaning each theatre had to produce its own films on its own equipment, and making these films was a lot more expensive. Additionally, silent film provided a very, very big competitor because there had been a lot of technological advancements in the time that people were still figuring out how to make talking film. Like the camera moved in silent films, and then they'd also added in slide cards to compensate for the fact that they had no dialogue, and in some circumstances they even had actors behind the screens saying the dialogue that the people on the screen were mouthing. So it really wasn't going well for talking film. Nickelodeons were also dying off at this time. In 1908, New York City had pretty much banned all Nickelodeons, and by 1915, the Nickelodeon trend had ended. So no real technological advancements were made in the 1910s due to World War I. Everyone in Europe was busy actually being part of the war, and everyone in America didn't want to take risks and just use silent film as propaganda, otherwise the government might shut the film industry down. That being said, Edison did release a revised version of the kinetophone in 1913, which operated in nearly 100 of the largest cities in America and had over 60 installers. However, it was marketed more towards vaudevilles and not actual moving pictures. Also, that same year, a massive fire went through Edison's complex and destroyed every record and film master there was for the kinetophone, so Edison just let the device die. In 1921, there was a small resurgence of sound-sync film with the phonofilm by Lee DeForest, and this was an advancement because it placed sound recordings directly on the film in an optical soundtrack rather than recording it on a different device at the same time. In 1923, the addition of phonofilm was sponsored into theatres, but it eventually died out as well. Also in 1921, D.W. Griffiths used Kellum talking pictures as curtain raisers for the New York premiere of his film Dream Street. However, the press hated it and the pictures were dropped from the film tour. So synchronized sound was really not having a good time, and it didn't look like it was going to get any better because of the popularity of silent films. They'd already put America on the map and were just getting better and better, and nobody really wanted to go back in order to go forward. So the synchronized sound industry was really just not thriving, and it took the establishment of a certain movie theatre company to actually get it going. Warner Brothers Pictures Incorporated was established in 1923 by Albert Sam, Harry and Jack Warner, and in 1924 they opened 2 theatres in New York and Hollywood and were the first Hollywood studio to produce, print and show their own pictures. In 1925, the company bought the Vitagraph Company, which gave them more studios, distribution networks and theatres, which then enabled them in April 1926 to establish the Vitaphone Corporation. The Vitaphone was a device used to record and play back synchronized sound pictures or talking films, and it allowed Warner Brothers to completely change the industry. They started that year with Don Juan, which was a silent film with a synchronized soundtrack and sound effects, and it was used as a test for public opinion on synchronized sound films. The public absolutely loved it, as by this time the technology had advanced advanced enough that the films were perfectly synced and the sound quality was good enough to be heard by the whole audience. This public adoration, combined with scientific work from the past 50 years, allowed Warner Brothers to release the first feature-length talking film on the 30th of December 1927 called The Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer was one of the most influential films of all time, as it profited $3.5 million and established Hollywood as the international home of film, as well as making Warner Brothers Hollywood's hottest film factory. There was a massive influx of actors, directors, and writers to Hollywood, however, a lot of people didn't find success. An example of this is Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, a couple who've been likened to the Angelina and Brad of their day, as they were both international superstars. Mary made the transition easily as she started in Broadway, but Douglas wasn't so lucky, and this ultimately ended his career and their marriage. Overall, the release of The Jazz Singer and the transition from silent to talking film immensely changed America, as it made Hollywood the international film capital of the world. This can still be seen today, as American films dominate the international box office and American celebrities are seen as worldwide superstars.